The world was no longer what it was meant to be. The echo of Eden, once a symphony of perfect harmony, had faded into a distorted, agonizing scream. Mankind, designed to be the crown of creation and the mirror of the divine, had turned their hearts into fortresses of impenetrable shadow. In the streets where there should have been laughter, there was only the cold steel of violence. In the homes where there should have been love, hate became the only language spoken fluently. We look back at Genesis and read the words, but do we feel the weight of them? The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a rebellion of the soul. Every imagination, every fleeting thought of the human heart was only evil, continually. Can you fathom the grief of the architect? To look at his masterpiece, the mountains he molded, the breath he gave, and see it rotting from within. It repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth. It broke his heart. The silence of God in those days wasn't an absence. It was the heavy, suffocating stillness before a storm that would wash the world away. This silence was a final mercy, a last breath before the justice of the heavens would collide with the depravity of the earth. The sky itself seemed to hold its breath, as if the stars were weeping for the tragedy unfolding below. A single candle can hold back the dark. In the middle of this decaying civilization, there was one man who didn't look at the shadows: Noah. He wasn't a superhero. He wasn't a king with a crown of gold. He was a man who walked with God. Think of that phrase, he walked with God. In a world running headlong toward the abyss, Noah slowed his pace to match the heartbeat of the eternal. While the rest of the world was screaming for more power, more blood, and more noise, Noah was listening to the whisper of the infinite. He felt the pulse of the Father's grief. He shared the Creator's tears. He saw the world not through the lens of human desire, but through the sorrow of divine love. And then, the silence broke. The voice that spoke light into existence now spoke a blueprint for survival. "The end of all flesh is come before me," the voice declared. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a divine decree. Make yourself an ark. Imagine the weight of those words. A vessel of salvation in a world that didn't believe it needed saving. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. A giant of gopher wood, pitched within and without. A sanctuary built of obedience, rising in a land that had forgotten the meaning of the word. Noah did not argue. He did not ask for a sign or demand an explanation. He simply took up the tool and began to build the impossible in the middle of the improbable. Then began the decades of the hammer. Year after year, the sound of construction echoed through the valley of dry bones. There were no clouds in the sky. There was no scent of rain in the air. Only the relentless sun and the mocking laughter of a world that thought it was immortal. Can you see them? The neighbors, the travelers, the merchants, pointing their fingers at the old man and his sons. They called him a fool. They called his faith a madness, a fever dream born of age. They spent their days in gluttony and violence, while Noah spent his in labor and prayer. The ridicule was a storm of its own before the first raindrop ever fell. They brought their children to see the monument of folly, teaching a new generation to laugh at the things of God. But every nail Noah drove into that wood was a silent sermon. Every beam he hoisted into place was a warning to a generation that had turned its back on the light. Faith is not believing in what your eyes can see. It is obeying the one who sees the end from the beginning. For 100 years, the ark grew. It stood as a monument of mercy. The door was wide open, a gaping invitation for anyone to turn back, to repent, to step into the safety of the wood. But the hearts of men were harder than the timber Noah worked with. They saw the miracle of the construction, but their eyes were blinded by their own pride. They mistook God's patience for his absence and his mercy for his weakness. The shadows were growing longer, and the laughter was about to be swallowed by the deep. Then came the day the earth held its breath. The animals arrived, not hunted, not driven, but led by a hand they didn't understand. 2 by 2, the majestic and the minute, the lion and the lamb, they marched into the sanctuary of wood. They sensed what the humans had ignored. The atmosphere had changed. The air felt heavy, electric, charged with the holiness of a coming judgment. The sky, which had been clear for generations, began to bruise with a deep, unnatural purple. The birds ceased their singing, and even the insects fell silent, as the migration of the wild became a funeral procession for the old world. Noah and his family stepped inside, leaving the world they knew behind. They carried with them the seeds of a new beginning, the only remnants of a world worth saving. And then, the most chilling words ever penned in the ancient scrolls. And the Lord shut him in. It wasn't Noah who closed the door. It was God himself. The time of warning had expired. The long suffering of the Creator had reached its limit. The door that had stood open for a century was now a wall. In that moment, the laughter in the valley died. The mocking stopped. A terrifying silence fell over the earth. And then, the first drop of water hit the dust. It was followed by 1 billion more, a rhythmic drumming of doom upon the roof of the only safe place left on earth. It wasn't just a rainstorm. It was the catastrophic unmaking of the world. The ancient scrolls of Genesis tell us that the fountains of the great deep were broken up. The very foundations of the earth groaned, buckled, and shattered under the weight of divine justice. The windows of heaven were not merely opened, they were flung wide. And the water didn't just fall from the clouds, it exploded from the crystalline heart of the planet. Can you imagine the terror? Everything that man had built in his towering pride, the soaring citadels of stone, the monuments to his own ego, the grand cities of sin, it all vanished in an instant under the absolute crushing sovereignty of the tide. The water rose above the hills, above the highest mountains, until there was nothing left but the roar of the abyss. The screams of the lost were quickly silenced by the thunder of the waves. For 40 days and 40 nights, the water reigned supreme. Darkness covered the face of the deep again, a terrifying echo of the void before creation. The earth had become a silent tomb of water, a watery grave for a civilization that thought it could live without its life-giver. But inside the ark, amidst the rhythmic swaying of the heavy timber and the anxious cries of the beasts, there was life. A flickering candle in a world of drowning shadows. The text says, "And God remembered Noah." He had not forgotten the man who dared to walk with him when the rest of the world walked away. Even in the middle of the most terrifying judgment, there was a place of perfect safety. Because when God shuts the door, no storm in this universe has the power to open it. Weeks turned into long, quiet months of waiting. The deafening roaring of the storm had finally faded into the hypnotic, rhythmic lapping of waves against the dark wood. The old world was gone, wiped clean from the map of existence. Silence had returned to the earth, but this time, it was a clean silence, a holy, expectant silence. Noah sent out a raven, a bird of the shadows, and it flew to and fro, finding no rest. Then he sent out a dove, a messenger of peace, and she returned to the window, finding no place for the sole of her foot to rest upon the drowned earth. Hope is a fragile, precious thing when you are surrounded by nothing but an endless, shimmering horizon of blue. Noah waited another 7 days, his heart anchored in the promise of the one who had shut the door. The isolation was absolute, a testing of the soul in the vastness of the water. But then came the evening of the second journey. The dove returned, her wings beating softly against the twilight air. And there, held firmly in her beak, was a freshly plucked olive leaf, a sign, a miracle of life. It was the proof that the judgment had reached its end, and the earth was finally breathing again. The roots were still there, hidden beneath the mud, and life was fighting its way back to the surface. To know with absolute certainty that the nightmare was over, and a new morning was finally breaking over the mountains of Ararat. The world was born again, washed clean by the very waters that had destroyed it. The great door opened, and for the first time in a year, the family stepped out into the light. The air was crisp, scented with the raw, sweet smell of wet earth and the promise of new beginnings. Noah didn't build a house first. He didn't seek his own comfort or the restoration of his own property. He built an altar. It was not an altar of pride or human achievement, but an altar of profound gratitude. He sacrificed from the clean animals, a smoke of thanksgiving rising from the mud of a new world. And as the smoke of his sacrifice rose into the vast, open cathedral of the sky, God painted his eternal signature across the clouds. A rainbow, a prismatic bow of light, burning with every vibrant color of his mercy and his grace. This was a covenant, a blood-sworn promise from the Creator to his creation, that he would never again destroy the earth by water. This bow was a war bow turned upward, showing that God's peace now reigned over the judgment. This is the true story of Noah. It is not a children's fable of a wooden boat and colorful animals. It is a cinematic epic of a father who saves his children from the wreckage of their own making. It is the story of a God who provides a way out when the world says there is no way left. If you feel like the floods are rising in your life today, if you feel like the storm is too loud to hear his voice and the shadows are too deep to find the path, remember the ark. Remember the promise. You are not forgotten in the storm. The rain will eventually stop. The door will open, and the light will return to lead you all the way home.